and all this stuff I get jazzed over. I get excited easily, but I'm particularly excited to talk to you because I mean, even your book says it all. From medic to mystic. I love kind of bridging the gap between the science and the mystical.
Mm,
So
mm.
you're a perfect person to do that with.
Thank you. I'll try to live up
Yes.
to the reputation you've
Oh,
given me.
you will. So I definitely want to talk about your book, your near-death experience, all of kind of your later life and what you're doing
Mm,
now. But there's things about your story that are just fascinating, kind of from the beginning. And I would love if you could take us back and just paint us a picture because
mm,
you had a unique childhood in terms of
mm, mm,
growing up in extreme poverty. And
mm, mm,
I've heard you mention things about your dad being telepathic and that you
mm,
felt like you
mm,
were born with these psychic
mm,
abilities.
mm,
So
mm, mm.
please spend as much time, start wherever it feels
Okay, well,
like it
I'll
makes
do
the
my
most
best.
sense.
I do tend to talk too much. I'll just grab it
No,
in the
please,
morning.
there's no such thing, no
Mm,
such
mm.
thing.
Well, I wouldn't say extreme poverty because we always had enough food, but we did used to have coats on the bed and sacks on the floor, and in the morning there would be icicles because we lived in basically a tin shed. There would be icicles a foot long inside the window. So I don't know. That's kind of to me that's not extreme. Extreme is what people are suffering in the war zones of this world. But it wasn't easy. And my dad had a heart attack when I was 11, and mum was then had to scrape a living from running our 3 acre small holding and working in the market. But I wouldn't say it was a deprived childhood because I was surrounded, I was loved. That's the most important thing, I think. And also beautiful surroundings with mountains all around. And I we lived some way outside of town, so I basically didn't have any friends. And so and so I invented one. I had an imaginary, but to me she still isn't imaginary. A little girl called Christina, who had short black hair, and we used to play in our cowshed up the field. And I used to insist my mother laid a place for her at the table, but I never asked my mother to put food on the plate. I think I was quite greedy even in those days, you know. But my parents didn't question it. I think because in Wales there is very much a spiritual culture, and I feel energy from the land. And uh, I used to do lots of experiments. I remember I used to grow gourds because my mother could sell the gourds as novelties at Christmas in the market. And these gourds are rather like cucumbers. They have tendrils. And I was just interested to see if I had the willpower to hold my finger long enough against a straight tendril so that it would curl around my finger. And so I was there for about 4 hours. Yeah, there is a curl in it, you know. And I used to sit next to my father's beehives, and I never got stung. But I'd be having a conversation with the bees, so I don't know if I was had Asperger's, but I don't think I have. I'm pretty non-Aspergery, you know. But to me, the spirits of nature were around me from the time I was little, and I think when you plant a seed, you're planting hope for the next 6 months or a year. And to me, that's almost a sacred practice. And I still grow farm. I give 80% of what I grow away because I just love growing food. But
Mm.
even more, it's lovely to give away as well. And so I'm in that cycle. So I was always a little bit weird as a child. I was late developing. In fact, I had to see. I remember I saw a psychiatrist when I was about 7 because I couldn't read until I was 8, and I had a very bad stammer. I was quite shy, and they were worried in case I was. I think they called it educationally subnormal, you know. And anyway, I went on to get a couple of degrees, so I think that wasn't probably true.
Yes.
But I think it's easy to get labelled when you're a young child
Yeah.
because I just was a late developer. I didn't, as I said, couldn't read till I was 8. And then I suppose in terms of paranormal, to me, the whole of nature is paranormal. It's just wonderful, you know. But in terms of paranormal experiences, I suppose the first notable one was when I was about 16 or 17. I was a so-called prefect. Our school system's a bit different from yours, but and if you were a prefect, you had certain duties, and one of mine was to be on late duty. So any kids that come in late, me and the deputy headmaster would, you know, cross them off as being late. I don't know if they still do it or not, but that's what they did in those days. And anyway, he was a perfectly fit chap. And one particular day, it was a Monday, the beginning of the week, I got up and we lived in a tin shed, you know, and I said to Mum, I'm afraid to go to school because someone's going to die. And I was really terrified. And but I always wanted to go to school because I was plump, and I thought, well, I'll never marry a rich man. I got to educate myself out of poverty, you know. So anyway, um, I went to school. Nobody died, but I was telling my friends, oh God, I was so upset. Blah blah blah. Same thing happened the next day. And my mother said, well, do you want me to call the doctor? And I said, well, I can't, you know, you can't say to a doctor, especially in those days, that would have been I was born in 49, it would have been early 60s, I suppose. You can't just say, well, I think somebody's going to die because you'd have just thought I was crazy. But anyway, on the third day, I woke up and I was completely at peace. And I said, okay, Mum, now I feel fine. I said, Mr. Sharp had died. Now, Mr. Sharp was our deputy head teacher. And he'd walked home from school, quite a youngish bloke, and he died in his sleep. And so I kind of think I was a school witch after that. And we didn't have a telephone, we didn't have television, so there's no way I could have known. So that was, I don't know, precognition or telepathy. I really don't know. But
So that was confirmed by you went to the school and found out that he had.
yeah, yeah. When I went to school, they said he died. Yeah,
Wow.
and I told my
What did you think of that?
well, I do. I just woke up knowing that he died, and I was at peace. It was almost as though I had a premonition because you know, I liked the guy. He was my Latin teacher. It was, well, I felt the couple of days before he did actually die, it was almost like being, I think, I don't know if you have the same saying in America, like a rabbit with a truck coming towards you, you know, bleh, sort of thing. And yeah, I have no idea. I can't explain it, but word got around because I'd been telling my friends somebody's going to die, and then I told my mother who it was. And then about 6 months later, my mother had a market stall, and Mr. Sharp's wife was one of my mother's customers, and she said to Mum, "Oh, I understand Nona predicted Harold, that's her husband's death." And this lady said she'd could sense his presence in her house, and would I go there? So there was me. I think I go to a school teacher's house, you know, because they were like really important, and they actually had a house with walls, you know, that were made of stone. I went in. And I said, "Oh, you're sitting in that armchair," and she said, "Oh, yes, I rather thought he was," and that was the end of it, really. And so uh, I kind of accepted it. I wasn't perplexed by it. Um, I think it was in my blood, in my genes, whatever. And then there wasn't too much happened then until, let me think. I was doing an awful lot of studying. I did a degree in biophysics, which involved a lot of really academic DNA stuff. And so I think I got the spirituality knocked out of me by an academic environment. And then I did medicine, and it was kind of how I got into medicine was a little bit serendipitous. I can say that. That's good. Because uh, I'd had, I was doing my finals for my first degree, and I had an impacted wisdom tooth. And in order to take it out, they'd had to kind of partly fracture my jaw. And so I was in a lot of pain. But my mother had actually paid for me as a 21st birthday present to have it out privately because otherwise they'd have had to wait too long. And I can remember the nurse gave me some pethidine. And I thought, isn't that amazing that you can actually do that to make somebody's life who was wretched? Suddenly I was back to feeling okay again. So it planted a bit of seed that maybe healing was a nice thing to do. And then I was doing a holiday job, cleaning toilets and the floors in a hospital just down the road. And there was a lady sitting outside a gynae department sobbing. And I was just a cleaner. And I went up and tried to console her. And she said, oh, she'd just been told she had pelvic infection and would never be able to have children. And I thought, oh, this poor woman, I can't do anything to help her. And that was enough to push me over the edge. And when I went back to you know, the final term, I asked my professor about getting into med school. Lovely woman called Jean Hansen. She was like my academic mother. and she managed to get me into Westminster Med School that same year. And that's how I became a doctor, really. And it is kind of interesting that years later, I became recognized as a kind of expert on the prevention of pelvic infection. So,
Oh,
so that
that's
was strange,
incredible.
wasn't it? Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. Roughly what year was it when you started, when you became a doctor, when you were seeing patients? What was that?
1975, I qualified from
1975.
Westminster Med School. Yeah.
And when did you have your NDE?
People always ask me about NDEs, and I think there's a tremendous amount of interest. Um, in fact, my friend Penny Sartori is one of the international experts. She was part of my meditation group, and I taught her as a nurse student. But my NDE was very minor part of my journey, and it wasn't a full NDE. But I was actually my father died June the 18th, 75, and I'd only been doing 2 weeks as a doctor, and I was doing a surgical 6 months of surgery as a junior doctor. And what happened is that one weekend I was off duty, and one of my colleagues was leaving, and we had a party, and I had 2 glasses of rather grim red wine. Now, I was an alcohol virgin because we couldn't afford alcohol. And so these really went to my head. And the following day, I did an early morning ward round, and I just felt awful. And one of my colleagues said, oh, he'd write me up for some drug. I think it was Stemetil or something, and to help with the nausea. I said, all right then, because I just didn't know. I was junior, and anyone above me I thought were gods. But anyway, an hour or so later, I was in the operating theatre, just about to start a case with my boss. And I suddenly had something called an ocular gyrate crisis, which is a heck of a mouthful, but it was an allergic reaction to the medication I'd been given. And my head was going like that right the way back, and you can't breathe. And so they had to stick me on a trolley and put me in the post-op room. And during that time, I went unconscious. And I can remember it was just dark. I didn't see any light, but I was floating in a dark place, but I was really contented. And I had this kind of telepathic voice saying, if you want to, you can die now. And I thought, yeah, great, this is cool, you know. But then they said, oh, but your mother will obviously be upset. Now, she'd only just lost my father. And so if I died as well, it would have crucified her. And I thought she's worked so hard to help me get through med school. And also my father looking down wouldn't approve of me giving it up, you know. But they said if you do go back, you'll have a very hard life. And I thought, well, all right then, you know, like having to do the ironing. And so I came back. And but that was my NDE. I didn't see any dead relatives or anything like that. I think I wasn't dead enough, if you know what I mean.
There's been a number of otherworldly spiritual experiences that you've had throughout
Mm,
your life, and your
mm,
NDE just kind of adds another layer to it.
mm,
And I know that you talk about some of these experiences too in your book, but I know that there was a point where you kind of had an overlap of you were still a doctor, you were still seeing
mm, mm.
patients, but you were starting to train in
Spiritual
spiritual
healing. Yeah,
healing.
yeah,
And
yeah.
you did have a patient come in whose mother, her spirit had followed her in.
Just backtracking a little bit, when my dad did die, I'd actually been working 56 hours. We used to work 120-hour weeks, and it was awful. And I was flopping on the bed, completely exhausted. And my father came into a room, and all he said to me was, phone your mother. And I said, oh, you'll be out in the field planting cabbages, and I'm too tired. I'll phone her when I had to sleep. But then the phone went to say he just died. So he'd reached out to me just to say, phone your mum. So that was a paranormal experience. And then really nothing, that was when I was a junior doctor. And then it was when I was at St. Thomas's Hospital as a registrar, and I became lecturer eventually, that I just was doing an awful lot of research, and it meant that I was completely cut off from any form of socializing. And I'd spent all my holidays, weekends, evenings reading research papers, and St. Thomas's has a beautiful old archival library. So I was very much living in my head, if you get my drift. And I can remember one particular, well, so many things happened. One particular morning, I think it was, one of my colleagues had gone off for lunch. That's right, it would have been the morning. And he said, "Oh, I've just seen a lady. She's only got a yeast infection. Will you treat her?" So, anyway, I called this lady in and I told her what my colleague has found and I gave her some medication. And she just went to leave the room and she had her hand on the door to leave. And then suddenly there was I can still feel it now, just to my right was like an oval, a big oval of gold light energy. And in the middle of it, I can't say I could see her face, but I knew it was a woman. And I knew it was this woman's mother for some reason, and I had no idea why. And it was just beautiful. In fact, I'm getting all quivery thinking about it. It was a lovely experience. And so I said to her, "Oh, would you mind coming back and sitting down?" Now, bear in mind, this is a teaching hospital. I was in academic unit with a white coat and a stethoscope. And, and I said, "Would you mind sitting down?" And I told her what I'd seen. She then burst into tears, and I thought, "Oh dear, if she complains, I'm in deep whatever, you know." So, but then she got up and hugged me and said that her mother had died, I think it was 3 months previously, and that she'd had the same image and she thought she was going crazy. And I remember she said she was head of English at a private school and was afraid to tell anyone in case she lost her job. So I said, "No, don't worry, we're both mad, you know." And I sent her to the I think it was Spurgeon's Association of Great Britain. I can remember I happened to have it in my diary, you know, as I sent her there. Never heard from her again, but but another time, and this was a really funny one. Sorry, I still laugh at it. A lady came in. I don't know, you know Michael Caine, the American, the actor. Well, if you can imagine, he's an English actor, I think, isn't he? If you can imagine his accent only in a woman, you know, I can't do a Cockney accent. But anyway, she came in and she was a real Cockney, a lovely woman, salt of the earth kind of, and again, I think she just had thrush as well. And so she was giving me her symptoms, and I was suddenly aware of a man kind of standing there, and he was very gruff, and um, I don't know, he just had a lot of anger in his soul, put it that way. And he, again, he's always standing to my right. And I said, "I can't go on." I said, "There's a man in the room." No, no, can you believe it? It was only me and her and an X-ray machine. No, not machine, a monitor, and, and a desk and two chairs. And anyway, she didn't run out screaming. She said, "Oh, don't worry, Doc, it's only Arthur." She said, "He's a bloody nuisance." She said, "He's been dead 5 years and he still follows me everywhere." And she said, "You tell him to bugger off, doctor." So, so anyway, mentally, I told him to bugger off, and he did. And then we went on with the conversation. So yeah, sometimes it's funny. Even with my I think second Lancet paper, um, I kind of accepted spirituality completely,
Wow.
alongside having a degree in biophysics and then medicine. And it was very important. The study we were doing was very labor intensive and very expensive, and we had limited amount of finances. So every patient had to come back, because otherwise you lose statistical um, evidence that it works. And so I used to hold the patient's case notes the day before they were due to attend and pray for them to attend.
Mm.
And there was one occasion where the chap who was my technician working with me, he couldn't come, and we'd made up, you know, it was a lot of work and I had to contact this lady to tell her, "Can you come the next day?" Not that particular day, you see, because he wasn't there. And in those days, we didn't have mobile phones, and I didn't even know where she lived. And so all I did was take her case notes and I kept praying, "Phone me, phone me, phone me." And she did. And with a few hours, she phoned me and said, "Oh, you've been trying to contact me." And I said, "Yeah." And then we carried on. So many
Wow.
weird things happened that if it hadn't happened to me, I probably wouldn't believe it, you know.
Something you talk about in your book is seeing a boy walk through
Yeah.
the
Mm,
wall.
mm,
Can you
mm.
tell us about that?
Oh, yeah. I'm so glad you brought this up because there are many reasons why you actually invest a lot of your time and energy into writing a book. And this was quite early on. I better kind of preface this in order for it to make sense. What happened is that I kind of was living, had these funny experiences, but then I got a consultant post in Swansea, and I was just doing medical work, and then one day I had a lucid dream, or one night, that one of my nurse colleagues had died, and I knew it was exactly the same as when Mr. Sharp had died. And so I went into work, about 6:30, and the cleaners were there, and I pretended I'd come to do some extra paperwork, but in fact I was preparing for the news that he died, and he had. And I felt quite upset by it, personally, because obviously he was not that old and he was a decent bloke. Um, but also, I thought, if I know somebody's going to die and I can't do anything about it, then you don't really want to know, because the dream I'd had wasn't in the immediate future. It was 6 months ahead, when we were appointing a new member of staff, and so that really was a kick up the backside, really. And I went to see a spiritualist minister because I just didn't want any more of these dreams. And she said, "Oh, this is spirit advising you to train as a spiritual healer." And so I said, okay. So it's quite a commitment. It was one evening a week for 2 years, but anyway, in the very beginning of my training as a spiritual healer, I found I started getting paranormal experiences, but I wasn't comfortable in knowing how to handle them. And what happened one day is a lady came in. She wanted a checkup. Uh, she had no symptoms and no risk factors for venereal disease, but she'd come to see me, and so I thought it was a bit odd. But then the nurse brought her into the room, and the lady came in. She walked past me to my right to sit down on a chair, and a little boy followed her. He scampered after her, gangly little kid. He looked like a prepubertal little boy with. I know he had a white t-shirt and dark shorts. I'm not sure if they were navy or black, to be honest. But then he scampered past it and disappeared into the wall. What was interesting is that I could see him side on, but I could also see his face as well. But anyway, he scampered past it, disappeared into the wall, and I just ignored it. I thought, that's interesting. And then when I was taking a history from her, I asked her if she'd had children, and she became quite sad. And she said, I did have a little boy, but he drowned in an accident. And she said this exact words: "Funnily enough, doctor, I've just been to see a medium, and she told me that he follows me everywhere." Now, I didn't tell that patient I'd seen him, because I think spirit, whoever he, she, or it might be, had sent her to me so that I could confirm it, so that she would really know. Because, okay, a medium says it, yeah, okay, but a doctor in a white coat says it, they're more likely, hopefully, to believe you. But, and I couldn't, I just didn't. I was either, I didn't want to upset her, and I didn't want to lose my job because I still had a mortgage to pay. So it was partly a good and quite a bad reason for me not telling her. I was just scared. And the next day I thought, oh gosh, I got to face things. I tried to find her address, but she hadn't given her case notes. And so after that, I felt guilty to this day. I'd actually said to Spirit, look, I don't want to feel this guilty, because it's obviously karma associated with it again. And I said, I promise I will always tell people if I see something, provided you promise me that there are not going to be any adverse consequences. And they never let me down. So after that, I once saw a lady come in with a horse. And,
Wow.
I can go into that if you like.
Please, yeah, because I actually have some questions about go into that, and then I've heard you explain how you see spirits or the dead, how they appear to you.
Mm, mm.
And you mentioned how animals look even more
Yeah,
real, more
yeah, they did
vivid.
actually. This horse did. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
I've
Let's
seen
talk about all of
I've
that.
I've seen two horses, no, one horse and two dogs, no cats. But I don't know. That's all I've seen in terms of animals. Um, right, the horse was the most dramatic. This lady again came in for a checkup, and she'd been referred by a gynecologist because of unexplained lower abdominal pain. And the gynecologist couldn't find anything and sent her to me. In fact, the gynecologist, a lovely woman, she was actually a part of my meditation group, so I think she suspected there was something spiritual going on. But anyway, she referred her to me. And again, she didn't have any risk factors for sexually transmitted diseases, and but she came in, sat down, and she was followed by a horse. And this was a full-size horse in my clinic. And I could, I said, can I kind of see it? Do you see with your eyes or do you see with your brain? You know, eventually we process images in our brain. But I could tell it was quite a big horse. It had a multicolored mane similar to this lady's hairdo, and it was brown and black and white or grey, I think they call it, and it was muzzling the top of her head. Now, I tried to interview this lady, asking about her sex life, whilst this horse was there muzzling top of her head. And he was becoming so strong, I thought, if I don't say something, he's going to poo on the floor and I'll have to clean up a load of... I'd probably take it home and feed my roses, you know. But anyway, I said... Sorry, I've got a wicked sense of humour.
I
I said,
love it. I love it.
I said to her, I said, this is in the middle of when did you last have sex? And oh, by the way, did you ever own a horse? You know, and um, she said, yes, I did own a horse. I said, was it brown and white and black, and did it have a multicolored mane? And she said, oh, it was tan. But you know, I don't know horses. To me, tan is brown. You see. And she said, yes. And I said, oh, did it ever used to muzzle the top of your head? She said, yes, that was the way it greeted her. And I said, oh, it's with you now and it's given you love and strength, you see. But anyway, she didn't bat an eyelid. Anyway, she got her up on the couch and I did, you know, pelvic examination and usual tests to see if there was anything going on. And I couldn't find anything physical. Um, and you know, if you do enough vaginal examinations, you kind of get a feel for what's inside, and I couldn't feel either physically or energetically there was anything really amiss. And so and I was feeling her abdomen as well, and again I couldn't sense anything that was medically wrong. And anyway, we were taking a little bit more of a history after I'd examined her, and she explained that she had a new partner and her family objected to it, very much so. And she said her family have disowned her. And I said, how do you feel about it? And she said, I am gutted. I'm gutted. And we looked at each other and the penny dropped. And what she'd done is to somaticize the emotional pain to her abdomen.
Mm.
And after that, I said, oh, I think, why don't you go and feed the horses in Pentloud is a place near where I lived, where they have lovely marsh ponies. They're beautiful creatures. And I said to her, I think you should go and feed the marsh ponies. And she said, oh, my partner told me that was a good idea. And afterwards, it was quite nice because once a year we were appraised, and what happens, all the patients you see on one particular day fill out a form anonymously to say whether you're a useless doctor or not, you know. And anyway, with her, she signed it and she said that I'd helped her reconnect with reality
Mm.
and to understand, you know, what's important in life. And so that was quite cool. And doggy wise, I've had two. One was a little black terrier, and one was a white terrier. And this one day, I was doing a clinic, and I was just started to interview a lady, and the little black dog with curly fur. I say curly hair, you know me. Uh, jumped on my lap, and I could feel the warmth of his body and the weight. And I looked down, a little black dog, and I went "Oh," like that. And my patient said, "Oh, are you all right?" You see, and I said, "No." I said, "Fine." I said, "A little black dog has just jumped on my lap." Again, most patients would run out, wouldn't they? But she said, "Oh yeah." She just looked. She said, "That's Sooty. That's my late father's dog." She said, "He follows her everywhere." So I don't know. These things happen, and I can't explain it, but it happened. And you know, maybe I am mad, maybe I'm kidding everyone, but no. Some of these things, I've actually had letters from patients where things have happened to, but obviously my editor didn't want me to publish them directly.
Something I heard you talk about, I think it was with Jeff Mara. He had asked you why you guys were talking about academics and kind of the pushback or the skepticism around all of this in that field. But you had mentioned that it actually that from your experiences, it's almost like they're just not talking about it publicly. Is that
That could
accurate?
be the case. I never had any. I never had a problem. Um, but you see, I'd established myself academically. In fact, when I met King Charles, he actually said to me, he said, "Oh." Dr. Blackwell, don't your colleagues think you were rather mad? Because I told him the horse story, you see. And so I said, well, sir, I've got 3 Lancet papers, 2 of which permanently altered clinical practice. I'm a member of the Integrated Health Committee of the Royal College of Physicians. I've got a clinical award for excellence. I was chairman of the Trust Consultants Committee and a few other things, you know. And I said, so when a colleague, when I tell a colleague a patient came in with a horse, I said, they asked me what type of horse. And then he laughed. And so I think I was lucky because I think I got quite a sense of humour. And if you've got a sense of humour, you're not quite as threatening. And also, I had a very good, solid academic background. I was a workaholic, and they knew me as being sane in orthodox terms. And so, yeah, I think they just accepted it as an eccentricity, really.
Something I Well, there's a couple things here. You've experienced some ripples in time as well as experienced kind of time moving forward. I think
Mm,
there was an experience with like a boiling egg and a
yeah,
stain
yeah.
on a sheet. Can we talk about that?
Oh, yeah, sure. Couple of things. Well, I got a friend called Angie Kruger, who is an internationally recognized medium. And I've kind of known her for years, although in fact we've been out of touch for about 20 years, and then recently she was working in my area. But anyway, this was years and years ago, 20 odd years ago, and I was at the beginning of my spiritual journey, and I actually met her at a body mind spirit fair, and I invited her to my home in Swansea because I was intrigued by her gift. And whenever Angie and I are around together, the vibes go up and weird stuff happens. But on this one occasion, um, well, there's 2 things. Firstly, yeah, it was the day before she left, or the 2 days before, I can't remember. I was in bed one morning. I remember it was 6:15, and it was June, so it was light. And I could feel something scratching on my pillow next to me, but there was nothing there, you know. And then uh, my friend Angie has a spirit guide called Richard, Richie for short. And I thought he was messing around. So I said, Richie, is that you messing around? And out loud. And I said, if it is, you give me a sign. Okay. Now, this is where it gets really far fetched. Your listeners will think I'm crazy. But Richie has a kind of totem power bird, which is a magpie. Okay. But anyway, I was saying, if it is, you give me a sign. And within a minute, I could hear, and my bedroom was like just across away from the kitchen, you see. I could hear someone, it sounded as though somebody outside was throwing keys at my kitchen window. And I thought, this is weird. So I went out, and it was no, it was a jackdaw, that's right, coming towards the window, banging against the glass, and he kept doing it. And there was nothing on the windowsill to attract him. And in the end, I thought he's going to kill himself, you see. And so I went outside, shooed him away. And that evening, Angie and I were after dinner. We usually meditate, and she went into a trance and brought Richie down. And I said to Richie, I said, "Oh, what happened this morning? You know, why were you in my bed scratching the pillow?" And he said, "It wasn't me." He said, "It was your late Jack Russell." And he said he just came to visit, and that's exactly what Towser used to do. He used to scratch my pillow. But anyway, and I said, "Oh," I said, "and what about the jackdaw?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "That was me." He said, "You asked me for a sign." And so he entered the brains of corvids, you know, one of the corvid family, this jackdaw, in order to draw my attention to the fact that it was him. And then I said to him, "Well, why not a magpie? Because magpie was his power animal, not a whatever you call it, totem animal, not a jackdaw." And then he said, I don't know if you're allowed to swear, but he actually said, "Where do you expect me to find a effing magpie at 6 o'clock in the morning?" But he found a jackdaw. So that happened. But then the following day, Angie was driving back to Cornwall, and I was boiling her an egg, you know, and her bedroom was like immediately above the kitchen, and she was getting ready to go. And I, as I was boiling the egg, I was just thinking to myself, and I think it was Archangel Michael, I don't know, but Angie and I had been contemplating having a workshop in my house in the following November. And the voice I got said she'll have a blowout on the motorway between Swansea and Port Talbot and will die unless you check her tyres. So I thought, oh God, by this time it was raining and I was in the middle of, doing some toast. And he said, no, you got to get us, you got to go and check the tyres. So anyway, Angie comes downstairs and as she's coming along the corridor, in my head, I flip ahead about 3 or 4 hours where I was changing the sheets. And she tipped some coffee on the sheet and it hadn't gone through to the mattress, so I was quite pleased. And as she came along the corridor, I said, "Don't worry, it hasn't gone through to the mattress." And she said, "How do you know I tipped coffee on the sheets, you see?" Because she thought maybe I'd be looking round the bedroom door. And I said, "No," I said, "I just flipped to the future." And I'd seen the only thing that concerned me is that when I did change the sheets, it wasn't such a big patch of coffee as I'd seen in my dream. So maybe there's more than, not my dream, my trance state. Whether there's more than one parallel universe, I don't know. So that was that. But Angie is like one of us, and it's fine. That's an explanation. So I said, no, you've got to come outside now. We go check your tyres. And she was bolshy. She didn't want to go outside because it was wet. I'm not going out. There's nothing wrong with the tyres. So we ended up arguing. I said, you're not having your egg till we go outside. So we go outside. And sure enough, there's a slit in the sidewall of her tyre. But what had happened, she then said, her spirit guide, Richie, had told her she had a problem with her tyres and she'd taken it to a garage and they hadn't found anything. But I think it was where the weight of the car, where it had, it had opened up the slit so we could see it. So, yeah, these things happen.
Can you talk about your dog and you knowing that your dog had cancer?
Oh, yeah, that's a funny story in a way. That was Keston. And he, oh, he's a lovely Jack, he was. Um, what happened is one night I was woken up about 2 o'clock in the morning. I was still working full time. And was my mother living with me? I think she was, yeah. Um, and this voice, and which I'm pretty sure was Archangel Michael, God knows why, but he said, you've got to wake up and check Keston's testicles, you see. And because he's got cancer in one of his testes. And I said, oh God, Michael, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm tired. I've got to be up at 6:30 to sort my mother out. I have this conversation. And he said, no, you've got to check. I said, look, I'll do it in the morning. No, you won't because you'll forget. No, I won't. You will. You'll forget. You've got to do it now. And I said, go away. I'm tired. He said, I'm not going away. But, oh, Christopher, okay. So he was actually lying by the side of my bed. And so I put my hand down. And as soon as I go to tickle him, he rolls over. So there's me groping his testicles at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I couldn't feel anything. There's nothing there, Michael. Yes, there is. You've got to do it again. Ah, right, do it again. Did it third time, so couldn't feel. He said, look, he's definitely got testicular cancer. And I said, look, I'm the pox doctor, not you. No, I didn't actually say that. I'm just embellishing a bit. But anyway, in the end, I could feel something. So, so I got the dog on the bed, put the light on, and I could feel the energy of cancer in one of his testes. I don't know how you explain it, but a difference in the vibration. And so the next day, I took the dog to the vet, and the vet couldn't feel anything at all. And so he said, oh, well, keep an eye on it, i.e., keep an eye on the thing that's not there, and bring him back, if you're worried. So a good few months later, it did grow. I took him back, and the vet was so apologetic because it was obvious now. And he had him in the following day and removed his testicle. It was a malignant lesion, but it was a very slow growing one. And so the dog died of something else years later. But it was quite interesting. When I did have to put the dog down because of renal failure, it was the same vet. And he again apologized for what had happened 5 years previously. And I said, well, I'd lied to him. I told him I'd felt the lump while I was washing the dog, which was a bit of a lie. But I thought, I can't explain that I've been groping the dog at 2 o'clock in the morning. And so what then happened? I just told him the truth. I said, "Don't worry." I said, "It wasn't your fault." I said, "An angel told me, and the cancer had only just manifest as an energy rather than being as a physical tumor."
What was the vet's response to you when you told him that?
Absolutely fine.
Wow.
Yeah, because he'd been taught by a professor whose wife was also into spirituality,
Mm.
and so yeah, no, he was very open-minded, lovely man.
Do you think that we're going to really see like a true integration where it's more doctors like you, physicians that we see on a normal basis also incorporate energy healing? I mean, everything
Well,
is energy.
I
So,
certainly hope so, but it's like saying, will America ever ban
yeah.
guns? You know, there's it's the same with medicine. A lot of it is it's the drug industry. They people earn money out of pharmaceuticals, and if we realize that a lot of us have the ability to heal ourselves, I think energy medicine would probably be a lot cheaper. But there
Yeah.
may be other factors that stop it happening. But I think with the way that medical costs are increasing, we're going to have to increasingly use artificial intelligence. And I mentioned it a bit in the book about Konstantin Korotkov, Professor Korotkov, who's developed it's a form of Kirlian photography, gas discharge visualization, whereby you're measuring the human energy field. And I think that area is very interesting because I had mine done several times years ago, and I had I'd fractured my ankle some weeks or months previously, and you could tell there was a change in the energy field in that area. And then another time I had it done, I had really bad sinus trouble, and you could see the changes. But they also you can show you where your chakras are, the energy vortices. And when I first went to them, I'd had an unpleasant experience, paranormal experience, which I won't go into. It'll take too long. But I knew that I felt my chakras were outside my body, and then when I had this machine measure them, sure enough, they were outside my physical body. And then I had weird stuff happen, but I had a healing by oh God, it's an awful long story, but I basically had energy healing, which put my chakras all back in line again. And what had happened then, it was a, um, it's such a long story. How many hours have you got, really? But I felt that my chakras were displaced from my body for reasons which difficult to go into. And I was in my kitchen in Swansea doing a stir fry, and I think my mother wasn't there at the time. Yeah, I was doing a stir fry and I was really hungry. And again, Archangel Michael came into my energy field. And I was saying, oh, I'm fed up of feeling like this. I felt my spirit wasn't fully within my body and I just didn't feel well. This had gone on for 2 years. And I said, I'm fed up feeling like this. And he said, you've got to go to Edinburgh to a particular workshop. And I'd been to an identical one in London a year before, so I didn't want to pay a lot of money. He said, no, you've got to go there. There will be someone who will heal you. And this was in November of that particular year. I got the dates in the book. And for the first, when I arrived there, it was on neurolinguistic programming the first 5 days.
Mm.
And I was looking around, there were a lot of nerds, a lot of guys who were interested in NLP. And there was nobody. I felt so lonely. I couldn't, and I thought there's nobody here going to heal me. And then they went. The next one was on shamanic trance. They had 3 days on shamanic trance, and we were divided into groups, and we were told. I think there was two, four, yes, six of us, and they the 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 group leader said, tell the group what you're good at, and then if someone else wants that gift, then you just join hands and share that energy. To me, I thought it was rubbish, but anyway, I said, I'm a good teacher and I can make really good mint sauce. Okay, so 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 the bloke next to me, he said he was good at housework. And he said to me, oh, I'd love the mint sauce recipe. He said, can we link up? I said, there's no way I want to be good at housework. You know, it's a complete waste of time, you know. And so, but the lady opposite me said she could speak to angels. Her name was Sharon. And so I linked hands with her. And although I didn't feel anything, she said, I've come all the way, and I won't tell you where because I don't want to lose her identity, to expose her identity. But it wasn't in the UK because Archangel Michael had spoken to her since she was young, and he told her to come here because there was someone that needed healing. And I said, oh, I've been looking for you all week. And she said she knew it was me, but was a bit reluctant to actually approach me, you see. And then in the coffee break, she just laid one hand on my head and the other over my heart chakra, and then she actually became Archangel Michael, and he said, "Oh, this was meant to happen. I'm sorry, I took my eye off the ball." And then I could feel this heat buzzing going through me. And that was it. And then when I had my chakras redone, they were all in line. In fact, I remember the lady that did them up in London, a chakra measurement with Korotkov's gas discharge visualization machine. They were so in line, she looked shocked. But it's a complicated story, and I'm sorry if I've confused people.
No, what did he mean by I'm sorry I took my eyes off the
Well,
ball?
I've no idea. I've no idea. I think what has
Wow.
happened is that I was meant, and then I was told that I channeled. This is by someone else. I channeled blue star energy, and that in order to, it's a very powerful energy apparently, and that I needed to suffer from it so that I wouldn't use it in a negative way. Now, I'm not aware of it, but when I asked, it was a medium, I think it was in Glastonbury, and they said, "Oh yeah, it was meant to happen, and it was really to give you a taste of what happens if you misuse energy, because you can really upset people, sort of thing." But I don't know.
Wow.
I really don't know, and I'm not aware of channeling anything, you know.
Something I just wanted to talk to you quickly about was Raymond Moody. He came
Mm,
up in another podcast and I'm
mm,
such a huge fan. He's got
yeah, yeah.
beautiful mind.
That's funny you should say that. I'm just leaning over because, oops, I bought his book back in 1975, and it's rather tattered. Don't know. Can you see that? If I put it on my face, it probably will.
Yes, there it goes.
Yeah, that's his original book. It's falling apart, but I bought it in 1975. The
That's
original
right
book.
around when it came out, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So I must have been very interested. It's a very old book, but I read it. I think I was when I was, and I've got certain things marked out in it. You know that I read many many years ago, and I've got his latest book as well. But yeah, to be honest, his original book is great. It's a
Yes.
classic, and it says it all.
It says
It,
it all. It really does. And he was truly one of the first. I mean, he coined the term near-death experience.
yeah,
But he was really one of the first to really talk about it and publish it and put it in
yeah.
writing.
Mm,
And I mean, that was in the 70s and
mm.
we're getting there.
Very slowly. And to
Getting
be honest,
there.
I think you're getting there in America much more than in the UK. Um,
Really, you feel that? That's funny. I would have thought
yeah.
the opposite. That's really
Mm,
funny.
mm.
Something I heard you touch on is that it's likely that we're in a simulation. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's like with most things. I've got very limited experience, but it kind of made sense because when my last Jack Russell Fido died, I was in a heck of a state, and I had to get friends to come and stay with me because I did not want to live. I absolutely adored this dog, and not having a family as such.
Mm.
Um, he'd slept with me for 13 and a half years, and outlived any bloke in my life by far, So anyway, um, yeah, and I had to get a puppy because I knew it was only a puppy that would. So I looked around to try and find a rescue dog, but I was desperate. And I had my a chap who helps me in the garden go around and dig out any toxic plants that might be in an area where the puppy could eat, you see. And uh, what happened? I decided to go out and tell him to dig up some foxgloves. And he looked shocked. And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you just disappeared and then reappeared coming round the corner again, you see." And he said, "Did you go back?" I said, "No." So he was gobsmacked. So we came in and looked at my CCTV. And the first, I think, 3 times we played it back, all that happened was me coming out of the house and going across the lawn, talking to him, blah, blah. But on the fourth occasion, when we played it back, I came halfway across the lawn, disappeared, and then came back, So it makes you wonder, doesn't it? I don't know. I really don't know.
I kind of usually leave it open to the guests in terms of final words or advice or however you want to wrap us up. Feel free to do so. Whatever you
Mm.
think is important for the audience to kind of hear and take away from this.
Yeah, it's a bit almost like political because I don't believe in conventional religions, and I think if we could all have a direct connection with God, whatever he, she, or it is, rather than going through intermediaries, then the world would be a much more graceful and beautiful place because we're buying into other people's mythologies, and so yeah, I just think it's sad when you think of a lot of the controversies and the wars in this world have been based on my religion's better than yours, so I'm going to shoot you or cut your head off or whatever. I think that is so sad. And I think the only way that's going to be stopped is if we have an alien invasion. And then they think, yeah, we're not unique, but I not particularly want an alien invasion, not unless they're really nice and cuddly and look like Elvis Presley, perhaps in his prime.
Oh, that's a great image. I'm with you though. I hear you. Yeah. I think we're just living in an interesting time where we're seeing different things play out because we need them to in order for us to wake up
Mm.
to some things every single
Exactly. Yeah,
day.
it's a great
Yeah.
awakening.
This was lovely. This was
Thank you.
truly
My
lovely.
pleasure.
It really was. I can't thank you enough.